I was heading home on a pretty isolated stretch of highway around 1 a.m. There weren't many cars around, which isn't unusual for that time of night. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car behind me, keeping a steady distance. It was a dark, nondescript sedan, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, things got weird. As I continued driving, I noticed the sedan was matching every move I made. If I switched lanes, they switched lanes. If I sped up, they sped up. Initially, I thought it was just a coincidence, or maybe they were just going the same way. But after the 10th or so minute of this, my nerves started to get the better of me. I decided to test if they were actually following me by taking a sudden exit off the highway. Sure enough, the sedan followed. Now I was officially freaked out. I got back on the highway hoping to lose them in traffic, but there were hardly any cars around to blend in with. Desperate, I dialed 911, but my cell service was spotty at best. The call kept dropping and I couldn't get through to anyone. I felt completely alone. As I glanced back, I saw the sedan was getting closer. My heart was pounding and I decided to floor it. My car isn't exactly new or fast, but it was my only option. I pushed my car as hard as it could go, weaving a bit, trying to put some distance between us. For a moment it seemed to work. The sedan fell back, but then it aggressively sped up, coming up right on my tail. I could barely see the driver, but they seemed determined to keep up the chase. As I approached the city limits, where I knew the roads would be better lit and more populated, I tried to calm myself, planning to drive straight to the nearest police station. But just as I was starting to feel a bit of relief, the sedan suddenly veered off into another lane, overtook me, and then slowed down directly in front of me, forcing me to slow down as well. I was prepared for the worst. I braced myself, thinking they might get out or do something drastic. But after a few tense seconds that felt like hours, they just turned off onto another road and disappeared. I drove straight home with my heart in my throat, constantly checking my mirrors. When I finally got home, I was a shaking mess. I locked everything up and checked all the doors and windows multiple times. I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I've never been so scared in my life. Today, I reported it to the police, but without more to go on, there's not much they can do. I'm just grateful nothing worse happened, and I'm seriously considering getting a dash cam after this. I was coming back from a late shift at work around 2 a.m. The streets were practically deserted, which is both comforting and a bit eerie. I decided to take a shortcut through some less traveled industrial area to shave a few minutes off my drive home. Big mistake. This part of town has a bunch of old warehouses and factories, some in use, but many abandoned. The roads there are poorly lit and full of potholes, not exactly inviting at the best of times. As I was navigating through this maze of streets, I noticed a figure standing by the roadside. It was odd, but I figured maybe someone had car trouble. As I drove closer, the figure started waving me down. Now, I'm usually the type to stop and help, but something about this just didn't feel right. It was too late, too lonely, and why didn't they have a phone or any emergency blinkers on? I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look without stopping completely. It was a man, and he seemed frantic. He started walking toward my car as I approached, which set off all sorts of alarm bells in my head. I decided not to stop and sped past him. Looking in my rear-view mirror, I saw him stand there for a second before he ran off into the darkness between the buildings. A little shaken, I continued on, eager to get out of there. But just as I was about to turn onto a main road, a car suddenly pulled out of one of the side streets and started following me. It was an old, beat-up-looking car, headlights dim and one of them flickering. It kept a close distance, and I could barely make out more than one silhouette inside. Now I was really on edge. I picked up speed, trying to lose them on the main road. They matched my speed, staying right behind me. At every turn I made, they followed. I didn't want to lead them to my house, so I aimed for the nearest police station instead. After a tense 10 minutes that felt like an eternity, I finally reached the station. I pulled into the lot and jumped out, heading straight for the entrance. I looked back and saw the car had stopped at the street corner, just idling. After a moment, when they saw me heading inside, they sped off. The police were helpful and sent a patrol to check the area, but they didn't find anyone. They guessed it might have been someone trying to rob me or worse, assuming I'd stopped to help the man. I drove home from the station with my head spinning, constantly checking my mirrors. Since then, I've avoided that shortcut, no matter how late my shift ends. It's just not worth the risk. Please, everyone, be careful out there, especially at night. Trust your instincts and don't stop if something feels off. I was on my way back from a weekend camping trip in the mountains, feeling pretty good and relaxed. The drive back involves a long stretch on a narrow, winding road through dense forest. Beautiful, but a bit eerie, especially as dusk sets in. About halfway through, my GPS suddenly lost signal and wouldn't reconnect. Typical, right? But no big deal. I knew the way, or so I thought. As I'm driving, the sun starts setting and the woods get that deep twilight feel, kind of peaceful, but also kind of creepy. Then, out of nowhere, my engine starts making this weird, clunking noise. I'm no mechanic, but I know that no car should make that kind of sound. It's getting darker and I'm in the middle of nowhere. Perfect. The noise gets worse, and then boom, my car just dies mid-drive. I manage to coast along and pull over to the side. There I am, alone, no car passing by, no cell service, just the sounds of the forest and my dead car. After a few futile attempts to start the car, I decide to check under the hood. Nothing obvious is wrong. I'm standing there trying to figure out what to do next when I hear rustling in the bushes nearby. I call out, thinking maybe there's another unlucky soul out there, but there's no response, just more rustling. I jump back into the car and lock the doors. Just then, headlights appear in the distance. I'm thinking, thank goodness, maybe they can help. Or at least I could hitch a ride to a spot with cell service. The car slows down as it approaches, then passes by without stopping. I'm pounding on my window and flashing my lights. But they just keep going. Great, right? Now, I'm not just freaked out, I'm also pretty annoyed. I sit back and try to plan my next move. Maybe 10 minutes later, another vehicle comes from the opposite direction. It's an old truck, and it actually stops a few yards ahead. An older man gets out and walks over to my window. He asks if I need help, and honestly, despite feeling uneasy, I'm desperate. He says he can give me a lift to the nearest town, but my gut is screaming that something's off. He seems too eager, keeps glancing back at his truck, and there's another person sitting in the front seat, just staring straight ahead, not moving. I politely decline, saying my friend is already on their way. He frowns, says, "Suit yourself," and goes back to his truck. They drive off, and I'm left there feeling like I dodged a bullet but still stuck. Eventually, I decide to try the engine one more time, and to my complete shock, it starts. It was like the car just needed a breather. I didn't waste a second. Drove out of there as fast as I could, still no cell service, constantly checking my mirrors until I hit the main road. I made it back without any other incidents, but the whole ordeal was like something out of a horror movie. I got the car checked later, and the mechanic couldn't find anything wrong that would have caused the breakdown. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? It all started when I was driving home from my friend's house. It was around 11 p.m., and the roads were pretty empty, which was a relief at first since I just wanted to get home and crash. But about 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed this old sedan behind me, I didn't think much of it until I realized it had been following me through every single turn. Not closely, but it was definitely tailing me. Trying not to overreact, I decided to test if the car was actually following me by turning down a few random streets. I even circled a roundabout twice. Sure enough, the sedan kept up. At this point, my heart started to race, and I figured I should head somewhere public. I drove towards the nearest 24-hour grocery store thinking I could park where it's well lit and maybe even run inside if I had to. As I pulled into the parking lot, the sedan didn't follow me in. Instead, it stopped at the street corner, just idling there. I parked under a street lamp, locked the doors, and watched. The driver just sat in the car, facing the store. After what felt like an eternity, they finally turned around and drove off. Relieved, I started to calm down and began texting my friend about what happened. But before I could send the message, I looked up and saw another car pulling into the lot. A different one this time. A beat-up pickup. It parked directly behind me, blocking me in. I was about to lose it. A guy got out, walked up to my window and knocked on the glass. He was big, had a beard, and wore a dirty baseball cap. Heart pounding, I cracked the window open just a bit. He asked if I could give him a jump. His truck was dead. Normally I'd help, but the whole setup felt off. The lot was nearly empty. Why park right behind me? I told him I was really sorry, but I was in a hurry and didn't have cables. He frowned, muttered something under his breath, and walked back to his truck. I texted my friend to keep them on the line and started my car, ready to peel out of there. Just as I was about to drive away, the original sedan pulled back into the lot, speeding straight towards me. Now I was genuinely terrified. It skidded to a halt right next to my car, and the driver, some middle-aged woman, started yelling through her closed window. I couldn't make out everything, but she was gesturing wildly, pointing at the truck, and then back at me. I had enough. Ignoring every red light telling me to stay, I drove around the pickup and sped out of the parking lot. I checked my rearview mirror and both vehicles stayed put, just sitting there as I drove off. I didn't go straight home because, honestly, I was afraid they might somehow follow me. Instead, I went to another friend's house nearby. Nothing else happened after that, but the whole experience left me rattled. What were they after? Were they working together, or was it just a weird set of coincidences? I've never been so scared in my life. I'm just glad I got out of there when I did, and that I'm here to tell you all about it. Stay safe out there, folks. Always trust your gut feeling and keep your doors locked. I was on my way back from a friend's house, driving through a rural area. It was late, probably around midnight, and the only light came from the moon and my headlights. This route takes you past farms and woodlands, really scenic during the day, but pretty spooky at night. As I was driving, I noticed a car parked on the side of the road. Nothing unusual, right? But as I got closer, the car suddenly turned on its lights and pulled out behind me. It stayed a reasonable distance back, but it was definitely following me. Trying not to jump to conclusions, I told myself they were probably just heading the same way. However, after taking a few random turns and seeing the car still behind me, my anxiety kicked up a notch. I decided to head towards the nearest town, thinking more lights and more people might deter whoever this was. The car continued to follow me, and I started to really worry. I thought about pulling over and confronting them, but quickly scrapped that idea. Instead, I called 911 on my hands-free, explaining the situation. The dispatcher told me to head to the nearest police station, giving me directions, since I wasn't far. Just as I started heading toward the station, the car behind me suddenly accelerated, overtaking me at high speed. As it passed, The passenger rolled down the window and, I kid you not, threw something at my car. It hit the windshield with a loud smack, but fortunately didn't break it. I couldn't tell what it was in the dark, but it scared the living daylights out of me. I floored it to the police station, not looking back. I pulled into the brightly lit parking lot and ran inside. The police were great. They took me seriously and sent a patrol car to look for the other vehicle, but they didn't find them. They checked over my car, too. And it turned out the thing thrown at my windshield was just an old burger. Gross, but not dangerous. The officers guessed it was just some idiots thinking they were being funny or daring each other to scare someone. Not funny to me. I waited at the station for a while to calm down before I drove home, constantly checking my rearview mirror. The whole experience was unnerving. I've since decided to avoid that route at night, sticking to the main roads where there are always other cars around. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.